Hello and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Bryant and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You are welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments and insights. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is next week on Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. and it will be a live family search Q&A session with Catherine Grant. And we'll actually be sending out an email tomorrow with a link to a Google Forms survey. And so if you have any questions you'd like Catherine to answer in that Q&A session, feel free to put that in the Google form. If you'd like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we're pleased to hear from James Tanner, who will be giving a presentation on beginning research in the Netherlands, Holland. James has over 39 years experience in genealogical research and is an avid blogger of Genealogy Star blog and Rejoice and Be Exceedingly Glad. He has served as a family history volunteer for 17 years and has presented at expos and conferences around the US, Canada, and Europe. He is a member of the board of directors of the Family History Guide Association and is currently serving at the BYU Family History Library. James is a professional photographer and has 7 children, 34 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. And James, if you're ready, we will turn the time over to you.
Okay, a couple of things. Welcome to the webinar today. We're going to be talking about beginning research in the Netherlands. Some people call that Holland, but we're going to explain that, how that happens. I will while we're doing this webinar. One of the things that I've started over the past few weeks is I'm focusing on research in specific countries. We have classes on Sunday afternoons and evenings, beginning at 2 o'clock, 3:30, and 5 o'clock. And the 5 o'clock classes are my classes, and I will continue talking about different countries. Eventually, we will cover most of the countries. I will cover most of the countries in Europe and perhaps in other countries around the world, like Latin America, and even perhaps in the Pacific or Far East. So this is an attempt to get a lot of these reference videos up on the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel, and so that we cover the background in a lot of different countries. Of course, we realize, of course, that in any given country, except for the ones that have large immigrant populations in the United States, there probably aren't that many people who trace their genealogy back to some of the smaller countries in Europe, such as the Netherlands. Okay, well, let's get started. Just to understand, the Netherlands consists of 12 provinces. And many people use the word Holland when they talk about the Netherlands, but there are only 2 provinces, North and South Holland, and together they're Holland. And they're all the 12 provinces together are the Netherlands. So when you're referring to the country, it's best to use the term the Netherlands, because that's the collective term for all of the different provinces there. Just kind of to remind people, about 1/3 of the Netherlands is below sea level. And over the centuries, the Dutch people have been building dikes and pumping the seawater out of the land, and then reconstituting the land and reclaiming it for agriculture and for businesses and for their cities and for many other things. So it's a very interesting country. It's sort of a self-made country in that sense. But as is the case with other European countries, the history of the Netherlands is complicated. The slide that I'm showing here is a European map in 1714. And I just kind of, it would be interesting. You can find these online easily. Just put up map of Europe in 1714 and and a map like this will come up. But if you're used to using the names of the countries that we have today, you might want to look carefully at a map at this time period. Many of the people I help when they're doing research have gotten back into the 1700s in Europe, and it's sort of unfortunate that a fairly high percentage of them just have never looked at a map. They have no idea what they're dealing with when they say, well, my ancestors came from Germany. And I look carefully at this map and see if you can see anything that even begins to look like Germany. And likewise, there are other countries which have areas that you would not think of were actually part of that country. Notice in this particular one of Italy and how many different papal states and different provinces and small countries it actually was not unified. And so doing research back into some of these countries like Germany and other countries like that is a challenge simply by the fact that they're so chopped up. And that's exactly the same thing that happened with the Netherlands, and I'll show you a little of that in the future. Of course, the first thing that we run into is the language barrier. And I have to admit, I have a background in the European languages as a whole, minus Hungary and Finland, but Dutch is about the most difficult language that I confront. It's much harder for me to read and to recognize the words automatically than it is for languages like French and of course Spanish, which I speak fluently, and other Italian and other languages like that. I can even read German more easily than I can with Dutch. Here we go. This is one of the great solutions given to us in the modern computer age, and that's Google Translate. I just like to make sure everyone is aware of this, and especially when you're doing research and you launch off into a country with a language you're not familiar with. It's almost 100 languages in here can be translated back and forth between all of those 100 languages. So if you put in the Dutch or copy and paste the Dutch into the left-hand side of the screen there, then you can see the English translation. Originally, when Google Translate was first developed a few years ago, we used to hear a lot of comments about, well, it's not a very good translation, or, you know, it's not literary translation or anything like that. Well, the answer is that isn't the point. And you certainly do not need a very good translation to do genealogical research. What you need is just knowing about what the word means. So we're usually looking up words like christenings and marriage and death and baptism and father and mother and child and son, daughter, uncle, and all of the usual words. Now, in addition to that, over the years, before there was a Google Translate, before we had this advantage online, there were a lot of publications that created genealogical word lists. So if you do a search on Google for a genealogical word list, you'll find probably quite a few copies, different word lists. One of them will be in the Family Search Research Wiki. So that's one place you'll find word lists for each of the major countries. The interesting thing and helpful thing, though, even though it's a little bit more difficult to recognize the words, is that the alphabet is the same. So there are no extra or omitted word letters in Dutch that there would be in German or Spanish or or French or any of the other languages who have some special characters. When you do have special characters, it's important to remember that they can affect the alphabetic order of the words in a word list or in an index. So you need to be careful when you do that. There are some things in Dutch that you need to be aware of when you start working with Dutch names, because you need to be careful to look up all of the names by all of the parts of all the names that show, because you can never be sure exactly what part of it was included in an index. Now we get to the other major challenge, and that is Dutch handwriting. This is beautiful handwriting. It's just very difficult to read until you get used to the way the letters are formed. And what I'd suggest when you do this is look for online tutorials. German tutorials are helpful if there's not a specific one, but there are Dutch handwriting tutorials, and they will tell you exactly how to all the different way that the words are formed, the letters are formed, and that how the handwriting looks in different years going back in time. And so it would be really helpful as you get to countries that you take some time to go through one of the online tutorials. Learning the handwriting and learning to read the handwriting is something that just requires effort and practice. It's unfortunately, we have to say that sometimes, that you really do have to make an effort to understand it and then practice it. What I suggest when you come to a new or difficult to read text is that you do look for an alphabet sheet, something that shows you what all the letters are supposed to look like, and then spend some time until you identify a few words. I wouldn't spend a great deal of time in any given session. I would spread it out over a period of time. I would first go for maybe an hour or an hour and a half or so, and then I would come back to it the next day and look at it again with the alphabet sheet, and then keep going, doing that in small bites rather than trying to sit there for hours and try to figure it out. There's just a point at which your mind refuses to see any more information. And so you need to spread it out. And what will happen is the longer you do this, I've spent as long as a week or two on these, on one set of, handwriting like this. And at the end of that time, all of a sudden it looks like you can see all the letters. And of course, if you don't understand the language, then you have the language challenge, but it helps when you can recognize the letters. A general rule here, I would say, is the importance of learning some of the history of every country where you do research. And in the Netherlands, it's almost, I can only say it's indispensable. There's not going to be any way that you can understand going back in the history of the country, going back, doing research back, even when you get back to the early 1900s and go into the 19th century, go into the 1800s, or even try to go back into the 1700s, you're going to find that unless you understand the jurisdictions and the changes and who was in charge and what was going on with the country, it's going to be just overwhelming problem. And the biggest problem is that you'll be unable to distinguish between people who have similar or the same names. That will become an overwhelming problem that you can't, you will be unable to resolve absent some initial knowledge of what was happening in the country and who was there and who you needed to be aware of. So let's go back to some kind of a really brief overview of the history. Most of Europe was populated by people they call the Bronze Age people from about 2000 BC to 800 BC. There are lots of remains. Most of the countries of Europe still have, we in this desert Southwest, that I live here in Utah, in Provo, we have ruins in our country that go back that far, but no history, and very little is known about the people that lived here before us. More and more all the time, but currently there's still long way to go to understand. But as far as genealogy is concerned, there are no records. There's nothing that we can really use to go back into this time of this age. Now we get into the Iron Age people that they consider to live between 800 BC up to 58 BC. 58 BC is the operative word here because this is the time when you find out that the Romans came in, and coming out of the Italian peninsula there, they began their conquest of that part of the world. And of course, we don't usually think of the Roman Empire stretching clear up north of France into Belgium, into the Netherlands, but they did. That's what happened. And then we have the Middle Ages, and in the Middle Ages, the Roman Empire began to disintegrate shortly before this 411 AD. And up until the 1400s, there were migrations across of Saxons and the Angles and the Jutes to the British Isles. And some of those people stayed in the Netherlands, and they're called the Frisians. So why is this important? Well, because we have, we in speaking English, as I'm doing at the moment, I am really speaking a language that is a mixture of Anglo-Saxon, French, and the original Celtic languages of Great Britain and Ireland. So there's really kind of a mixture of all those languages in English, whereas in the Netherlands it was more to the Germanic language that was coming from the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes. And so they've called that language the Frisian language, and that's one of the early languages that were spoken. It's unlikely, again, that you would be doing genealogical research clear back into the 1400s, but it is possible. There are things that you could learn. Now, here's something that is very important that you may not have realized, is that from 1516 to 1581, the Netherlands was occupied by the Spanish and was under Spanish rule. And then you'll see from this map that by the time you get into the 1500s, this is a 1700s map, so a couple of hundred years later, you'll still see that there was a Spanish part of the country. And so there's other influences here of the Spanish. And probably one of the interfaces here that you need to be aware of is the religious interface, where eventually in this time period when the Catholic Church was extending its along with the Spanish and the French and other countries and what was left of the Roman Empire, those people, all of those people were Catholics, or the vast majority. And of course, this was about the time when the Reformation began, and there began to be Protestant churches, and the dominant Protestant church, what we call the Lutheran Church today. And so there's kind of an interface here in the Netherlands between the Catholics and the Protestants. Again, this is a very complicated history. Just understanding that all of these things are going to happen at once. It sounds to me like I have a very complicated history going on here in my house right at the moment. Sorry about that. And in 1713 and 14, the war ended and the southern Netherlands returned to the Austrian Habsburg monastery. and Austrian, and became the Austrian Netherlands. So the Germanic influence, once again, we had Spanish influence, we have Anglo-Saxon influence, now we have the Austrian Empire moving into this Netherlands, or what they called the Low Countries. And so in the 1700s, when you start to get into, if you're doing research back to this point, you really are starting to get into a whole different world of challenges in getting information and locating where the people lived. Kind of moving forward past all of that, there was a time when the local Dutch people began to claim sovereignty, and the different provinces, each of the different provinces was technically a different country, and they amalgamated into with a centralized government. And their representative government presently is a parliamentary representative government, and it's at a constitutional monarchy, and it's decentralized. It's unitary, meaning it's one government, but it's not centralized government. It's decentralized in all the different provinces, and it's called as consociation nationalistic. It's a very difficult word. I've been trying to say it for the last couple of days. State. So what that means, it's sort of a consolidated socialist nationalistic country, but it's also a constitutional monarchy. Though you know it, and you have to understand some of this when you get into the records, because the way the records are kept and the jurisdictions and where you might look for records is very important. One thing to always remember, and this is the primary point that we need to know about every country in the world, and everything that goes along with when we do genealogical research, and is that all the genealogically important records are organized geographically. That means that all the records are found at or near a place where an event occurred in your ancestors' lives, and they were recorded by someone who was either there at the event or had a duty to record the event. Now, what about records that move? Obviously, after they're created and they're still genealogically important, they may have moved into some other part of the country or some other part of the world even. So that is the biggest and most important objective of genealogy, is determining the location of events that occurred in your ancestors' lives. And that's absolutely imperative when you get into a country like the Netherlands, where you have each of those provinces, and it's very possible that each of the provinces you could have someone with your family name, or in many of the provinces, and unless you can identify exactly where your people came from, you may very well pick up on somebody else. Now, a kind of a side note here, because we're getting into the 1600s, 1700 range here. And one of the major connections in our history of the United States is back in the colonial period. And in the 1600s, a group of Protestants were, in a sense, driven out of England, and they moved into the Netherlands for many, many years. And these people then became concerned that their English-speaking children were being absorbed into the Dutch culture and learning to speak Dutch. And so they started the idea of leaving the Netherlands and traveling to the New World, to America. And they rented a couple of boats. One of the boats was kind of leaky, and so they all piled onto the second boat and came to America in a ship that we call the Mayflower. And these are the Puritans, or the Pilgrims, that we refer to, that came in 1620 to Massachusetts. But one of the interesting things is at least my ancestor who was on the Mayflower intermarried with someone from the south part of the Netherlands. In fact, may have been in Belgium, and and so there's one little connection I have there back to the Netherlands. The earliest records in the Netherlands date from the early 1500s. Generally speaking, these are church parish registers, and they are available. Something important, and we'll get into that, but one of the important things that we need to know about the Netherlands is that they have excellent preserved records. And each of the provinces, each of those separate parts of the Netherlands has compiled extensive online resources. And it's just it's a place where you can actually do some very good research back into this 1500 period if you're persistent. You may not be able to get all your lines back, but there's very good chance that you'll find some very substantial records to work with. One of my friends who is from the Netherlands and who has done extensive research has emphasized over and over again to me that the Dutch records are just absolutely fantastic. There's just really a lot of information out there. And so it's a rewarding place to do research if you once you get over the bump or the hill of the language and the handwriting. Here's a suggestion for starting. In most of the major countries of the world, all the major countries with substantial genealogical records are outlined in research sections in the Family History Guide, the fhguide.com. And you can basically go to this one for the Netherlands and start and learn about each record set with either videos or handouts that will explain to you step by step how to work with the records and how to proceed with the research. So it's a very good basis way to do it. And we will be doing videos, which is something that we'll be working on in the future, and basically have some introductory videos for all of these countries so that you can watch a video and get an overview. The FamilySearch.org, the first place I would go to get an idea of the records that are available would be to go to the search tab on FamilySearch.org and go to where it says records. Then you'll see a view on the records that has a map of the world, and it's an interactive map. And so if you click on Europe, you're going to see a list of the countries in Europe that you can select the country, and down there in the list will be the Netherlands. And you will find this. And this is a maintained list of the connections of the main information that you need to know on the FamilySearch.org website about the Netherlands. The links here to learning courses and to the Family Search Research Wiki, and the indexing that's going on, and what kind of percentage of the records, of certain records, have been indexed. And then a list here of all of the records in various collections on the FamilySearch.org website. Let me just mention this in kind of a summary. And this is something that you should be well aware of in Family Search. If you look at this list here, you'll see the first set is the records that are filtered by collection. These records are in the historical record collections. That's the part of Family Search that has these records, and they are indexed records. primarily. They're not, maybe not completely indexed, or they may be in the process of being indexed, but they do have some indexed records. So these are records where you could actually look by names and dates and places to find your ancestors. The second group of records on Family Search are the image-only historical records. These records are in the catalog. So if you go into the catalog under the search tab and go to catalog, you'll find that the major search is geographic, as I mentioned a moment ago, that's exactly where these records come from. They come from organized geographically, so you have to find them geographically. And then within that, you'll be able to go to places within the Netherlands and get more information about more records about the provinces. And then within the provinces, you'll be able to get more records from the cities. Okay, so then and then there's a third set of records in there. And the third set of records is under the search tab on Family Search. So if you go to familysearch.org, you'll see it says Family Tree, and then it'll say search. So you go to search tab, you click down, and the second item on there is images. And this is another set of records. And these are separate sets of records on Family Search. They're not duplicative. They are unique records in each set. So if you're looking at the historical records, the only overlap here is the historical records are also listed in the catalog. But these records, the images, are records that have yet to be cataloged or indexed. So they're just raw records that have been uploaded from the digitization projects that are going on around the world. And when you go to the images, you'll put in the country again, because here we go with the geographic searches. And then you will find thousands of additional records. Now there's no indexes, so you're going to have to focus on the location and the time and actually go page by page looking through the records to find what you're looking for. But it's understandable also that those records are being added to virtually every day as they add more and more records to Family Search. And they're also leaving there when they are finally cataloged and going over to the catalog. And eventually will end up in historical records in the historical record collections when they are indexed. So those are kind of the steps as they move through this website. And you may not have known that there were all of these extra records sitting out there on Family Search. Oh, with the wiki. Now, of course, the wiki is useful because when you get here to the wiki, you're going to see on the right-hand side over there a list of all the different types of records that you might be searching. And the wiki, it tells you how that works. And so you're going to find a lot of resources and also links and websites. Some of this is overlapping with the Family History Guide, but the advantage of the Family History Guide is it's a step-by-step teaching mechanism. Now, this is what I mentioned a moment ago. These are each of the provinces, and these are the records that they have on Family Search. This is a list of Family Search records from each of these individual church and civil registration records that have come. The church records are the records from the parishes and the diocese, and in the Netherlands. The civil registration records usually begin in the early 1800s and may differ in their coverage from province to province. So there's no standard way to know when those records are. That would be the helps that you would get from looking for those records. Another place to get good records from the Netherlands is through ancestry.com. Now, what you're going to find immediately is that when you open up one of these record systems, if it's not an index and hasn't been indexed by Ancestry, it will simply be all of them. And you'll see little notations down here on almost all of these records that say they're in Dutch. and some of them are in German. And so you really are going to be immediately into the looking in Dutch and German and searching in Dutch and German. Another thing that you need to be aware of that's very helpful in doing research in all of these countries, but particularly in a country like the Netherlands, is that the way that the names are spelled changes dramatically. When you go back in time in any of the countries of Europe and in the United States and any place in America and in the British Isles, no matter where you go in the world, as you go back in time, you essentially hit a point in which nobody knew how to read. That the vast majority of people did not know how to read or write. And the way that their names were spelled varied from document to document. And so dogmatically thinking that you're looking for your ancestor because their name was spelled this way is simply a trap. You're just trapped in not being able to actually find the people, because the names will not have been the same. And there may be many, many variations of those names. And that's another one of the challenges. But once you get used to all of the names and all of the variations of those names, then you'll be able to understand that. And one of the ones that when I mentioned earlier about all of the pieces of the names, one of my great grandfathers was from England, but the family eventually came from the Netherlands, so way back in the early 1700s, that they left Netherlands and came to England. But their name is a Dutch name, and it's De Vries. And the D part is the D of Fries, and Frisia is one of the provinces in the Netherlands. Well, so that's a generic name. That's a locational name, and it has been spelled with a V, like in Victor, and it's also been spelled with an F, as in Frank. So you know, and it's spelled with a D, E, and a space with a V or an F, and it's also spelled with both of them together. So technically, on just that simple name, there are at least 4 different ways to look up that name without even beginning to get into any other variations that are out there. Okay, now sometimes we have a tendency to overlook, here in the United States, we have a tendency to overlook MyHeritage. And MyHeritage is very, very big in Europe. It is easily the biggest genealogical company in Europe. They have over 8 million people on their registered users of MyHeritage, and they have a lot of people in each of the European countries. So one of the first steps I would suggest is to get a subscription to MyHeritage, and they would be able to then you would put up your information that you do know, and it's very likely if you have any kind of large family in the Netherlands, that you would very quickly find people in the Netherlands who were doing genealogy on some of your same lines. This happens extremely common and extremely helpful when you start getting involved in MyHeritage as a program. And so here's kind of a list of what they have. They have 250 million records, and they have the coverage, but most of their records are into the 1800s, the civil registration records, and then the baptisms do go back into the 1500s. So you've got a fairly substantial additional set of records from Family Search, MyHeritage, and from Ancestry with records in the Netherlands. and 3 different search engines that may be able to help you find all that information. Obviously, when you get into these records, you are going to start wanting to get directly into the records that are available in the countries. And in this case, fortunately for those of us who speak English and who do not speak Dutch, that the websites are translated into English. That lets you get into the website, but does not help a whole lot in searching for the names and looking at the records, because the records are not translated into English. But in here they have the history background, they have all sorts of information in the National Archives. So if you just search for Netherlands National Archives on a Google search, then you won't have to remember the name there, that website with all the A's in it and the .nl at the end. Who was who? It's wie was wie in the Netherlands. And this is a free subscription. They have a level, searching level for a subscription level, and then a premium access. This is another Netherlands website. So you're going to find, of course, the interface in English. If you look way up in your screen up in the right-hand corner, you'll see a little NL and a line and then an EN. Well, you click on the EN, you get the English translation as much as it's possible, because it's not going to change a lot of the language there into English, because it's static language. And obviously none of the records are going to be translated. So it's still a challenge, but at least the interface and the names and some of the explanations are in English. The free subscription is adequate to do some searches. The premium access is always more helpful, but I would try the free subscription for a while, and if you find out that you're finding the information that you are not finding in some of the other websites, then it would certainly behoove you to get, if you have a substantial family line in the Netherlands, it would behoove you to get a subscription. And this is another one. This is basically what's happened here is that we have what they're called the open archives. And what these have done is to go in and, in a sense, liberate the names and all of the information from the archive records, from the old records, handwritten records, and transcribe and index at least parts of those records. So this is another website that is very helpful. And once again, you'll see that it's in English and in Dutch. And so you can then go in and get a subscription on this website to do some searches and begin searching for your names and places. There's sometimes there's a kind of a limited blinders. You put blinders on a horse so that it doesn't get distracted or spooked by things off to the side, and especially on wagons, on horses that are drawing wagons in a city or in a congested area. And the same thing happens, though, to genealogists a lot of times, that they will search on Family Search and they may go to Ancestry, and then they think they're done and they think that's it. There aren't any more records and I can't do anything. And the answer is that in this, what I'm showing here in this case, is that not only are there the big websites that we use in English and search in English and work with in English, there are a lot of other big websites from these individual countries that, and especially from the Netherlands, that have substantial collections of records. And as I mentioned a moment ago, each of the provinces has their own websites with their own records. So you really have to go down a little bit further in looking at information. Cannot assume that either Family Search or Ancestry or any of the other countries could possibly have the records that you're looking at, could have all of the records that would help you find your ancestors. Yet another archive. This is actually the National Archives of the Netherlands. And it is the and they have, in this particular one, they have 85 participating archives, and they have 100 million descriptions and more than 55 million people in here. So this is one of another great website for doing and you may even find this one, you may even find photographs, and I suppose it's possible you could find newspaper accounts of your ancestors and images. So it's time, it's very important that you learn about each of these websites. Hopefully fortunately, all the ones I've covered so far have an English version that will give you information about what they do have and what kinds of records you can expect to find, and also instructions on how to do the research in each one of these websites. This is another website. This one also is it's like a search engine and gives you a searching of all sorts of different kinds of books and letters and newspapers and other kinds of records that are out there. And you can do searches, and as you see at the bottom, you can do a search by date, by a birth date. It's interesting kind of challenge that you have in genealogy is that once the records are indexed and they have a search engine, you have to supply them with information. And the answer is, well, if I knew that information, I wouldn't be looking for it. And so basically there's kind of a chicken and egg problem here where you have to determine a certain amount of information before you can even begin to get information from most of these websites. But here again, this is another huge website with 100 million pages of all sorts of information and references, including newspapers and others. By the way, the newspapers in this part of the country, in the world, in Western Europe, go back into the 1600s. There are newspapers back that far, and it's very possible that to use those records to go way back into all of the areas in there. And this is another one. It's called Genealogy Online. It's not our way of spelling genealogy. It has an IE on there, but it's in the Netherlands. And this is it's also available in English, and I happen to be in the Dutch version of it at this point. But this is another big website, cooperative kind of website for looking for additional information. And it's also connected, this particular one is connected to Family Search and some of the other record connections that are out there. So there's a lot of information out there. Okay, so what I would suggest as we go through this, that you basically need to keep looking. There's plenty of information. There's plenty of places to go. So kind of in summarizing what I've been saying, in the first step of any kind of genealogical research, before you get going, and it isn't something that when I say first step, I don't mean beginning steps, because beginners and people who have been doing this for 40 years, like I have to do the same thing. And that is, we need to look for locations. So the first thing I ever do when I look at a new person, new level of genealogy of some of my research, is I check all the place names. I go through and make sure that I have the correct jurisdictional order, whether I go from house to street to city to parish or to some kind of a district or municipality, to what would be a county equivalent, to the state or province equivalent, or and then to national, that I understand exactly what that line is and that I have at least one anchor there, meaning I found the exact location of an incident in my ancestor's life. So this is the story, that the first step in the process. And once you focus on a location, then the next step is to discover the records that may be available for that. And this is where all these websites that I just went through come into play, because they're the ones that give you the records organized geographically and temporally and by time and place. And so once you have a time and a place, then you have a way to start looking for the records and looking to identify the records. Once you identify those records, then obviously you're to the point of actually searching the records. So there you are, searching in those records. And then, of course, you're recording whatever information and substantiating it by listing all the places, the sources where you find the information. That's kind of an overview of the process here. And the tools, as you can see from what I've reviewed, are available. And each one is going to be a challenge. It's just like learning how to use Family Search or learning how to use Ancestry. You have to go through that process to learn to use the archives and the other websites that are out there, particularly here now that we're talking about the Netherlands. Okay, any questions? Let's see, there's a Q&A up here. Why don't I get out of that and stop sharing my screen, and then we can look at Q&As. Okay. Yep. Okay. Someone's mentioning that if a child dies in a family, that historically in most every country I've encountered across the world, if a child dies in that family and another child is born of the same sex, then that second child may very well end up with the same name as the first child. And I've seen as many as 5 children, as it says here, 5 girls with the same name in the same family that died, all of them that died. I found a family where it was multiple children. It was just crazy. I can't imagine going through that process and how bad that was. Let's see, what else do we have here? Anything in the chat? Nope. And I think there was one more. It's a question, if you only have an event year, what month and date should you use to search? Well, whatever the beginning month of the year was, you realize when you get back into the 1600s that calendars change, and the first day of the year may be in April instead of in January, or even in March, depending on how the calendar is reading at the time. But it's you search back and forward from that year. So if you have a date and a month, then you're going to search back years on either side of that date or month, regardless of what the date you have. So let's say I had a date in 1850. I would search all the records from the late 1840s, say from 1847 and 48, 49, 50, up through 55, 56. There are 2 reasons for that. The first one is to make sure that I haven't overlooked or that I missed the record because it was recorded earlier than I thought or later than I thought. And the second one is, if there are other people in that family, children born in that family, they would likely be born within a 2-year period of the child's birth date. So let's say that I had child born in 1850, I'd expect another child in 1848 or 49, and another child in 1847 or 46, and so forth. So that's how, and I would go both directions, forwards and backwards from those dates. That's just a common practice. So same thing good happens with census records. A lot of people find the census record, say, oh, wow, that's really great. Well, how about you go look at every census record in that town or census district or whatever, and see how many other people might be related to you. So those are all kinds of suggestions. Anything else out there? The Hague is the capital. It's in the sense of that's where the records are kept. So you have to look under the town in the, yes, that's an important thing. That you find that, and that's why I mentioned that on the catalog, in the Family Search catalog, you look at there's the time, there's the place, and there's the thing. I mean, you go to look at the place, and when it comes to the Netherlands, then it'll say places within Netherlands. There'll be the provinces, and then there'll be places within the provinces. The records are not duplicative, they're cumulative. So you have to look at every level as you go down through the records. And in this case, as is the case in all of Europe that I've done research in, you have to get down to the parish level. And in many cases, you have to go down to the house level of where the people lived, find the exact house they lived in. And that will help you to identify that family correctly. The one link is the National Archives, and the other link doesn't link. And there may be one. I used the direct the link from it. I think there are two different websites. So we have this one, which is this one right here, this website. And then we have the other one, which is this website. They look like different websites to me. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, that's a good point too. Frisia is a separate language. It is not Dutch, it's Frisian. And different parts of the country speak Dutch. When we were in the Netherlands, we found out that probably 90% plus of the people we ever talked to spoke English. We understood in talking to the people in the Netherlands that the children go to school learning Dutch for the first 3 or 4 years of school, maybe 5th grade. And then from then on, they learn English and French and German. So they learn a lot of languages. They're the crossroads of Europe and a very, very commercial place. And the children and most of the people were not just bilingual, they knew at least French, German, and in some cases Spanish, so, along with Dutch and English. Any other questions? Thanks. Bryant?
Yeah, that looks like that's about it. Thanks so much, James. Be sure to join us next week for our webinar, a live family search Q&A session. And like I mentioned in the beginning, we'll be sending out an email tomorrow with a Google form survey in it. And if you have any questions that you'd like Catherine to answer, please submit them in that Google form survey so that Catherine can prepare. Thanks so much for joining us today. As always, this webinar will be uploaded in the next couple of days and will be put on YouTube and on our website. Thanks for coming today, everyone, and we hope you have a great day.